We all carry a hidden force within a side of us that doesn't play by the rules, that feels rage, jealousy, pride, shame, and desire. Most people try to ignore it, suppress it, or cover it with a false mask of politeness. But the truth is, your dark side isn't going away, and if you don't face it, it will quietly take control of your life from behind the scenes. Mastery doesn't mean eliminating your darkness. It means understanding it, integrating it, and using its raw energy as a tool for growth, not destruction. Carl Jung believed that ignoring the shadow only strengthens its power, but when you bring it into consciousness, it transforms from a threat into a source of deep wisdom. This video will show you how to stop being controlled by your darkness, and how to walk alongside it with clarity, courage, and grounded power. The dark side of your personality, the impulses you suppress, the thoughts you deny, the parts you label bad or unacceptable, doesn't disappear when you ignore it. In fact, it grows stronger. Every time you look away from it, judge it, or pretend it doesn't exist, you give it more control over your decisions, emotions, and behaviors. This is the paradox. What you push into the unconscious doesn't die, it gains autonomy. It starts to leak out in disguised forms, through passive aggression, sudden anger, emotional shutdowns, self-sabotage, or toxic relationships you keep repeating. You tell yourself you're a good person, but meanwhile, your shadow is busy steering the ship behind the scenes. Carl Jung warned that whatever remains unconscious will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This means if you're not facing your shadow is driving your destiny, and it's often steering you straight into the same painful cycles over and over again, until you finally turn around and look it in the face. Ignoring your dark side can feel safer. It allows you to fit into society's mold, avoid shame, and pretend you're in control. But deep inside, you know something's off. You feel the hidden tension, the misalignment, the self-betrayal. Your reactions become disproportionate, your mood shifts without warning, and you find yourself stuck in patterns you don't fully understand. These are not random glitches, they are signs that your ignored shadow is acting out. The dark side includes all the emotions and desires that you weren't allowed to express as a child. Anger, ambition, sexuality, arrogance, power, even joy if it made others uncomfortable, so you learn to shut them down. But emotions don't vanish, they morph. Repressed anger turns into depression. Suppressed confidence becomes chronic insecurity. Denied ambition shows up as envy. The more you ignore these energies, the more twisted they become. The only real path to freedom is through awareness. You have to stop pretending you're just light, and admit that you're human, and humans are made of both light and dark. When you acknowledge your dark side, not as a flaw but as part of your wholeness, something shifts. You begin to take back your power. You stop reacting blindly. You stop projecting your unresolved pain onto others. You begin to respond to life with clarity, instead of unconscious patterns. Facing your dark side is not about glorifying it. It's not about indulging destructive behavior or justifying harm. It's about holding it in consciousness, naming it, understanding it, and then choosing how to relate to it. The part of you that wants to manipulate, dominate, or retreat into self-pity doesn't disappear, but you no longer let it run the show. This inner work takes courage. It's uncomfortable. You'll be tempted to rationalize, to blame others, to stay in denial. But the longer you resist this truth, the more your shadow will sabotage your goals, relationships, and peace of mind. It will use your blind spots against you until you shine a light on them. So ask yourself, what am I pretending not to feel? What parts of me do I hate or fear? Where do I lose control without understanding why? These questions are the doorway. Go into them with honesty, not judgment, because mastery of the dark side begins with facing it, not as a monster to slay but as a teacher that holds the keys to your liberation. The most dangerous shadow is the one you don't see, and the longer you ignore it, the more control it has over your life. True strength comes not from perfection, but from radical self-awareness. When you stop hiding from your darkness, you stop being a slave to it, and that is where real transformation begins. When you repress emotion, you don't eliminate it, you bury it alive. It doesn't fade, it festers. Every unspoken truth, every swallowed tear, every time you pretended you were fine when you weren't, it all becomes emotional residue that clogs your psyche, and eventually that residue leaks out as sabotage. Not because you're weak or broken, but because what the psyche cannot express, it will distort. You'll cancel plans last minute, ghost opportunities, lash out at loved ones, or sabotage a relationship just when it starts feeling safe, and you won't always know why. That's the poison of repression. It turns raw emotion into hidden behavior. We're taught from childhood to suppress what's uncomfortable. Don't cry, be strong, calm down. So we learn to compress grief, anger, shame, and fear into silence. But energy doesn't vanish, it transforms. Repressed anger can become passive aggression or chronic fatigue. Repressed sadness can look like sarcasm or numbness. You might smile through pain, pretend to be okay, even achieve external success, all while your inner world quietly unravels. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Repression keeps emotions unconscious. But unconscious emotions don't just sit quietly. They brew beneath the surface, creating tension, disconnection, and a split between who you are and who you pretend to be. That split leads to self-sabotage, not because you want to fail, but because unresolved emotion is trying to find a voice. Think about it. You finally get close to someone, and out of nowhere, you start picking fights. You get an amazing opportunity, and suddenly you procrastinate or shut down. You tell yourself, I'm just lazy, or I ruin everything, but the truth is deeper. A repressed part of you is reacting, trying to protect you from something it doesn't feel safe to face. And until you meet that part with honesty and compassion, it will keep acting out in destructive ways. Repression is seductive because it offers temporary control. If you don't feel, you don't have to deal. But that control comes at a high cost. Authenticity, intimacy, inner peace. You become an expert at avoiding, performing, surviving, never fully living, and over time the body keeps the score. Your nervous system becomes dysregulated, your sleep suffers, your relationships feel hollow, the sabotage becomes chronic because the emotions never got space to breathe. The antidote is not expression for the sake of venting, it's conscious feeling. It's learning to sit with discomfort long enough to hear what it's actually trying to tell you. Anger might reveal a boundary you never learned to set. Sadness might show you where you abandoned your own needs. Fear might highlight where you still carry old wounds. When you repress these signals, you silence the wisdom within you. To stop sabotaging yourself, you have to stop lying to yourself. Not by force, but by honesty. Let the emotions come up, not to indulge them, but to understand them. To let the wounded parts of you know, I see you now. I'm not going to keep hiding you away. Healing starts the moment you choose awareness over avoidance. When you stop treating your emotions as enemies and start treating them as messengers. Because every sabotage is a cry from a part of you that's been repressed for too long. And when you begin to listen, not judge, not fix, just listen, you stop living in fear of yourself. Repression might keep you functioning, but it won't let you thrive. To live freely, to love deeply, to grow fully, you need access to your whole emotional range. You need the courage to feel what you've been taught to bury. And in doing that, you break the cycle of unconscious sabotage. You stop being a stranger to yourself. And that's when real power returns, not the power of control, but the power of integration. Self-reflection is not just a soft spiritual habit. It's a radical act of reclaiming your authority from everything you've outsourced it to. People's opinions, old conditioning, outdated roles, survival patterns. Most people walk through life ruled by unconscious scripts. They react, conform, perform, without ever stopping to ask, is this truly me? Self-reflection interrupts that autopilot. It forces you to look inward and confront what you've internalized. Whose voice is guiding your choices? Whose fear you've mistaken for your own? Whose definition of success you're chasing like it's salvation? Without self-reflection, you become a product of your environment. You absorb your parents' wounds, your culture's values, your society's ideals, and wear them like skin. You might think you're living your life, but you're actually living someone else's expectations. That's how the dark side takes control, not through malicious intent, but through unconscious agreement. You betray your own instincts because they were never validated. You abandon your truth because approval felt safer. But in silence, shame, or anxiety, your real self still aches to be heard. The power of self-reflection lies in its ability to bring what's hidden into the light. When you start asking honest questions, why did I react that way? What am I avoiding? What part of me doesn't feel safe here? You peel back layers of illusion. You start noticing how much of your behavior is based on fear, on roles you were forced into, on wounds that never got to heal. And instead of blaming the outside world, you begin to take ownership, not shameful ownership, but liberating responsibility. Carl Jung believed that true freedom comes from individuation, the process of becoming who you really are beneath all your masks. But individuation cannot happen without reflection. Without it, you stay fragmented. You over-identify with the persona, the mask you show the world, while the shadow, the parts you hide, runs the show behind the scenes. Reflection integrates both. It allows you to see your contradictions, to admit your messiness, and still choose wholeness over perfection. It's not comfortable. Real self-reflection can feel like death to the ego, because you'll have to admit you were wrong, that you've been lying to yourself, that your pride was protection. You'll realize you've hurt people while trying to protect your own wounds. You'll see the ways you shrink to stay loved, the moments you betrayed your values just to avoid conflict. But in that discomfort lies the seed of transformation. You can't change what you won't face, and you won't face it until you slow down enough to reflect. Authority doesn't come from dominating others. It comes from aligning your life with your inner truth. And that alignment only happens when you become honest about your motivations, patterns, and fears. Every act of self-reflection is a step toward sovereignty. It's saying, I will no longer live on borrowed beliefs. I will no longer obey a voice in my head that isn't even mine. You stop being reactive and start being intentional. Reflection also protects you from spiritual bypassing. You don't just slap a positive affirmation over your pain. You don't pretend you've healed when you've only numbed. You ask the hard questions. What am I pretending not to know? What pain am I still avoiding? What part of me have I rejected just to feel worthy? These questions don't destroy you. They rebuild you, from the inside out. And slowly, something beautiful happens. You stop needing external validation. You stop chasing perfection. You become your own authority, not because you have all the answers, but because you're finally asking the right questions. You stop fearing your darkness because you've seen it, sat with it, and made peace with its message. You become someone who doesn't just react to life, but responds to it with clarity, depth, and inner stability. In a world addicted to distraction, self-reflection is rebellion. In a culture that worships performance, reflection is power. It's not about overthinking, it's about reconnecting, because when you reflect with compassion, you rewire your entire relationship with yourself. You become less ruled by fear, more anchored in truth, less swayed by noise, more loyal to your soul. And in that space of quiet honesty, something sacred returns: your voice, your path, your authority, not borrowed, not forced, not performative, but deeply, irrevocably yours. Mastery means understanding that your shadow isn't something to be erased, exercised, or eliminated. It's something to be channeled, and that shift in mindset is everything. Because as long as you believe your shadow is bad or evil, you'll keep disowning it. And anything you disown doesn't disappear, it controls you from the dark. The truth is, the parts of you you've been trying to suppress, your rage, envy, insecurity, arrogance, manipulativeness, don't go away when ignored. They grow stronger, more distorted, and eventually explode in ways that sabotage your relationships, your self-worth, and your path. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That's what mastery is. It's not about pretending you're pure, it's about becoming whole. The shadow contains vital energy. Your suppressed anger might be the boundary you never learned to set. Your envy might be the unlived desire you were too afraid to claim. Your arrogance might be covering a deep-seated fear of inadequacy. When you meet those parts with honesty and curiosity instead of shame and rejection, you can redirect their energy toward healing, creation, and strength. Mastery means becoming intimate with your inner contradictions, not to indulge them but to understand them. It's asking, what's the deeper need underneath this destructive impulse? What's this reaction trying to protect? Most of the time, your shadow traits aren't inherently toxic. They're coping mechanisms that hardened into habits. They developed to protect you when you didn't feel safe, seen, or accepted. But now they might be keeping you small. They might be costing you connection. And the only way to transform them is to bring them into the light, not with judgment, but with responsibility. You can't fake this work. True mastery doesn't come from suppressing your shadow and acting enlightened. It comes from looking your shadow in the face and choosing how to relate to it. You stop being a victim of your impulses when you recognize their patterns. You begin to choose your response rather than being hijacked by your triggers. That's the power of integration. It gives you freedom from being unconsciously ruled by the very parts you're trying to hide. There's a huge difference between repression and redirection. Repression says, "I must not feel this." Redirection says, "What is this feeling asking for, and how can I express it constructively?" When you channel the shadow, you transmute its raw, untamed energy into creative fuel. Many of the world's greatest artists, leaders, and visionaries didn't achieve greatness by being perfect. They mastered their inner chaos and gave it purpose. That's not glorifying dysfunction. It's owning that the same fire that can destroy can also illuminate. Channeling the shadow also protects you from becoming spiritually hollow. If you try to live only in light, you end up fragile, afraid of your own messiness, intolerant of others, addicted to control. But when you've faced your darkness, when you've sat with your shame, owned your rage, and wept for your unmet needs, something deeper awakens. You no longer need to pretend. You become grounded, unshakable. You can be with others in their darkness because you've made peace with your own. Mastery doesn't mean your shadow disappears. It means it stops hijacking your life. You're no longer scared of feeling anger, sadness, or desire. You know how to navigate them. You use them as guides, not as excuses. You stop outsourcing your power because you trust yourself to hold complexity. You stop needing perfection in others because you've learned to hold your own contradictions with compassion. In that way, channeling the shadow is a return to authenticity. You stop performing and start living. You stop silencing your instincts and start listening. And from that alignment, you act, not to please, not to prove, but to express what's real. So if you truly want to master your life, don't aim to be flawless, aim to be whole. That means embracing the entire spectrum of your humanity. It means understanding that your shadow, when seen and channeled, can become your greatest strength, not because it's always beautiful, but because it's true, and the truth, no matter how messy, is always the starting point for freedom.